All right. Hello, everyone. It's really an honor to be in community with all of you today. Welcome. I'm Jill Krakow-Zinkraff, Interim Executive Director of the National Women's History Alliance, and I'm so excited to welcome you to today's webinar, Moving Forward Together, Inspiring Generations, Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray. As we gather during Black History Month, we recognize that history is not just about remembering the past. It's about how we carry those stories forward to inspire future change. Today, we focus on the powerful legacy of Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray, and through today's discussion, we hope to honor her contributions, explore how they continue to resonate today, and inspire action. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the exceptional individuals on our board of directors and advisory committee, whose leadership and dedication make our work at NWHA possible. Their commitment ensures that all women's history remains visible, celebrated, and impactful. And a special recognition to our co-founder and former executive director, Molly Murphy McGregor, whose vision and leadership has been instrumental in shaping National Women's History Alliance and the movement to integrate women's history into our national narrative. And so with that, I am honored to introduce Rosita Stevens Halsey, a dedicated advocate and educator committed to preserving and promoting the legacy of Pauli Murray. As one of Pauli Murray's nieces, Rosita considers it both an honor and a responsibility to ensure Murray's pioneering work continues to inspire future generations. Having been part of Murray's Washington, D.C. family, Rosita was deeply influenced by her aunt's independence, perseverance, and activism, shaping her own work as an advocate for inclusion, equality, and human rights. Through speaking engagements and personal appearances, Rosita is dedicated to bringing Murray's story to young minds, encouraging them to follow in her aunt's footsteps in the ongoing fight for justice. Her unwavering dedication to uplifting Pauli Murray's legacy and advancing social justice makes her an invaluable voice in our community. And so please join me in welcoming Rosita Stevens Halsey.
Good evening. I'm so pleased to be here. If you don't already know, I'm sure you're here this evening about my amazing aunt, Reverend Dr. Pauli.
Well, on the ground.
Feminist, legal theorist, labor organizer, attorney, poet, author, professor, and a priest. Right now, I'm not going to talk too much about those things, but I do want to share that she was one of the most important people of the 20th century that few people have ever heard about. Someone who was very involved in human rights, women's rights, gender rights, civil rights, and most things that are important in terms of social justice. She was immensely guarded about her personal life because she already had two strikes against her. She was African American and she was a female. And that was what, excuse me, followed her throughout her life. You will learn many things about her I'm sure you've never heard that are quite amazing. When she died, she left over 100 boxes of information at the Schlesinger Library about her life, including tapes, recordings, manuscripts, speeches, sermons, her diaries, and her journals. When Jill started today, one of the things that she said was that we would hope to inspire future change. And this is what has been on my mind for the past few weeks, living under all of the changes, complex, unexpected, and tumultuous during 2025. And I wanted to share with you several things that I participated in the past few weeks because I think it's important to all of us to think about things of this nature and determine what can we do. For the past several weeks, I was in Durham, North Carolina, and the first thing that made a real impact on me was participating in possibly my final professional development with the Durham Public Schools. Durham has definitely made Aunt Pauli what I call a daughter of Durham. She is on the sides of buildings in beautiful murals. There's the Pauli Murray Center, which finally opened last September after years of hard work and fundraising. She's mentioned in tourists and promotional um, publications for the city. And in the surrounding counties, there are murals of her as well. This, of course, was very impressive to me when I first went there in 2016. But last week, um, after the professional development for the Durham Public Schools, I was lucky enough to be invited to the Durham Symphony Orchestra. We had a dinner first, and after the dinner, uh, we spent about 90 minutes doing something that seemed so important and impactful to me. The guests at the dinner were people representing many of the organizations in Durham who are advocates for social justice, citizen rights, caring for the citizens, seniors, and organizations of that type. And we were asked to think about the state of our country now, the things that are happening right before our eyes, and what can we do to continue our work, but to broaden our impact on our own communities. I was one of the people who was not from North Carolina, and most of my work is not in North Carolina. But it was so warming to work with people who do this every day and were really thinking deeply as to how we can work together or go back to our various organizations and try to make an impact on the situation we find ourselves in America. I then had the pleasure of speaking to two youth groups. I hadn't talked to any groups of students in 2025. The first group of students I talked to were in Chapel Hill, and they were middle school students and high school students. And my presentation was generally about Pauli's history, my life knowing her during the 43 years our life intersected, the impact that she made on me, and the impact that she made on the world that a lot of people are really unaware of in those areas I mentioned to you before. But what touched me so much was that I saw fear in the eyes of these young people. I saw confusion. They began to open up and talk with me and ask me questions. And I was able to get them to interact with each other. And it crossed my mind that it was important that before I left, I talked to them about how Aunt Paulie's values and the trials and tribulations that she went through, the trials and tribulations my parents, grandparents, and the slave Harriet on my mother's side that I've learned so much about went through right there in their area in Chapel Hill, in Durham, and the counties around Durham. And we began to talk about that. I felt good before I left because I was able to share with them that they are the future of this country. And it's important that they understand what this country has meant to so many people, how hard so many people living now and who came before us have worked for the democratic ideals that we had, and the fact that as young people, they will be the leaders of our country. I asked them to read about Pauli and learn about the things that she had done, the things that she had learned, and how she had inspired others, and to use their resources with their leaders of their groups and the teachers in their classroom to not be apathetic, but to come up with solutions for what we could do now. And I felt really good before I left that their parents came up to me and said, I'm so glad that you said some of the things that you said, because if we had said them, it may not have had an impact. And it is so important for them to understand that we will work through this, that we've been through things that are much more difficult. And every time I read about my aunt, meet somebody else who's done research about her, I realize that there were so many things that she had to deal with in her life that there's nothing I could go through that I think could be as difficult as her life was from the beginning to the end. Before I left Durham, I met with college students from UNC Chapel Hill, and the same situation was in their eyes. I was in a group with the Bishop of North Carolina and some members from his staff, as well as the youth coordinator for the students. And there were some parents there. There were even male and female students in that group. And the students represented um, all of the levels of college. Some of them were seniors and some of them were freshmen. And we were able to have a discussion about Pauli Murray and about her values and all she had done, the hard work that she and others like her had done, but also talk about the fact that they will be the leaders of this country. And it's important that they understand where we've been. It's important that they understand our history. And it's important that they take the situation seriously. Again, I felt good at the end that they were interactive with each other, that they came up with some solutions, and that they took on some responsibility for the situation. So I just wanted to share that with you because I don't want us to go away without thinking how important it is that we learn lessons from Pauli Murray and use these lessons immediately. I'd like to introduce our next speaker. Is it time for that?
It is.
Our next speaker is someone I know well, someone I hate to follow because of her eloquence and her knowledge of my aunt and the way that she always talks about her. And I've learned so much more about my aunt from our next speaker, Angela Thorpe Mason. It is my pleasure to introduce her. She is a cultural heritage leader and a public historian, dedicated to preserving and amplifying the legacy of the Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray. As the executive director of the Pauli Murray Center for History and Social Justice, Angela leads efforts to honor Murray's groundbreaking contributions to civil rights, gender equality, and social justice. Under her leadership, the center has expanded its reach through community programming, strategic partnerships, and innovative educational initiatives that brings Murray's story to new audiences. Her work is deeply rooted in equity, advocacy, and ensuring that Pauli Murray's legacy continues to inspire future generations. Again, Angela Thorpe Mason.
Thank you so much, Rosita. And everyone, it really is an honor to join you today to celebrate the Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray. Um, Rosita, I so appreciated what you offered us, especially around this question of what do we do? What do we do in this moment? How do we rise to this moment? Like you, I have been getting that question a lot. And so my presentation too is grounded in trying to help us think through that reality. I'm going to take some time to walk us through some of what Rosita's aunt, Pauli Murray, did so that it sparks some inspiration and it helps us understand what is possible. And should we have time towards the end, I'm going to leave you with a bit of a framework for helping you to think about what can you do today in your communities to meet the current moment. You all have heard from Rosita, and again, you're hearing from me that Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray was an incredibly expansive person. And so I will do what I can in 10 minutes, but invite you to visit the link that I just dropped in the chat if you feel empowered to learn more about Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray or the Pauli Murray Center as we round out our conversation. I've got a couple of visual aids for us. So I'll go ahead and share my screen so that we can get started. So, the Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray, again, someone who is incredibly, incredibly expansive. And it looks like my screen sharing got paused. So, I think what I'll do here is just talk us through what we're going to be talking about today. Today, we're going to be talking about Pauli Murray's mission, the mediums that Pauli Murray used to do her work, and then also the movements that Pauli was engaged in. One of my favorite realities around Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray is that she moved from movement to essentially apply social justice work for the world or to the world. So again, we are going to talk through some of that. Now, when we think about Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray's mission, she had what I would describe as a two-part mission. And it was a very clear two-part mission. Part one was to upend race-based discrimination. This was largely catalyzed by Pauli being raised where I am today, where Rosita just was in the Jim Crow South in Durham, North Carolina. The second part of Pauli's mission was to upend sex-based discrimination. And I'll offer that this was largely catalyzed by Pauli's experiences in law school at Howard University School of Law at in Washington, D.C., where she was the only woman in her graduating class. As I named, Pauli Murray used a lot of different mediums to fulfill her mission. This included direct action and protest, writing and advocacy, creativity, legal theory and litigation, education, and even spiritual practice. Murray's work was also not static. As I stated at the top of our conversation, Murray applied her work to several movements. And so I think for us, this can be considered an invitation to everybody on this call, and also a reminder that there is no one way to fulfill our individual missions or to approach and carry out social justice work. So let's take a look at some of the work that Murray did. Again, this is just a snapshot. I want to start from the beginning because this is really interesting to me, and I think a nugget that sometimes we forget when we think about what Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray offered to the world. Murray began her work as a labor organizer. And I'll say that again. Murray began her work as a labor organizer. Rosita spoke to that in her comments as well. And how does Murray get to this point? As a recent graduate from Hunter College in New York City, Murray was a solidly working class person themselves and was ultimately faced with unemployment at the point that she graduated, in large part due to the Great Depression. As a result, Murray ended up working for the Works Progress Administration, where she did things like teaching adult literacy to folks and also teaching workers' rights to folks who were kind of in the early stages of learning about the power and possibility of labor organizing. And it's really this work that brought Murray to the understanding that the fates of working class people and Black people were inextricably intertwined. She therefore protested and advocated on behalf of Black workers, both in New York City and throughout the South. And I'll offer that one of the people that she advocated for in the South was a young 20-something Black man named Odell Waller. Odell Waller was a sharecropper who defended himself against his white landlord. And as a result of that self-defense, he was placed on death row in Virginia. Pauli felt very connected to his story, sought to get him off death row, and worked with an organization called the Workers' Defense League to advocate on behalf of Waller. Waller was ultimately executed in Virginia, and it's really Pauli Murray's failed role in this advocacy work, what she felt was a failure again to get this person who she felt connected with off of death row, that led Pauli to enroll in law school and pursue her next aspiration, which was to ultimately dismantle legal segregation legally. Murray thus had a strong conviction at this point to serve as a civil rights attorney to help people like Waller and so much more. And this really is Murray's beginning of what becomes a decades-long commitment to civil rights work, beginning in the 1940s. As I stated just a couple of minutes ago, Murray was the only woman in her law school class, or the only person perceived to be a woman in her law school class, and faced maltreatment from male professors and male classmates. This experience led Murray to coin the term Jane Crow to describe the dual discrimination that she faced, being both Black and someone who was perceived to be a woman. While at Howard University School of Law, Murray organized some of the earliest sit-ins to integrate Washington, D.C. restaurants, and also supported undergraduate students in protesting and organizing other direct action. And I'll offer that between graduating from Howard University School of Law and receiving that JD and pursuing a Master of Law at the University of California at Berkeley, Murray completed her senior paper or her senior thesis from Howard University School of Law. The legal theory that she set forth in that paper was used nearly a decade later to successfully argue Brown versus Board of Education before the Supreme Court. And ultimately, Murray never received formal credit for that brilliant work. Murray went on to have an impactful and illustrious legal career that included penning what Thurgood Marshall later referred to as the Bible for civil rights litigators during the height of the civil rights movement, advocating for the inclusion of sex in the 1964 Civil Rights Act, and becoming the first Black person to receive a doctorate of law from Yale University. Murray was also tapped to support the civil rights work in the 50s and in the 60s due to sort of the groundwork and the infrastructure building work that she pursued in the 1940s. And I'll offer that she ultimately left that movement because of male movement leaders' poor treatment of Black women. Murray transitioned from civil rights work to women's rights work. Ultimately, she saw, after leaving the civil rights movement, the need for a civil rights organization for women. And so she organized alongside other women for many, many years until this idea was finally brought to fruition in the National Organization for Women, which Murray helped to co-found in 1966. Murray's legal work and legal theory also supported then attorney Ruth Bader Ginsburg in the 1970s in illuminating the unconstitutionality of gender-based discrimination before the US Supreme Court. And in this instance, she was credited for her work. I'll close by helping us think about Murray's advocacy from a spiritual perspective. Murray was a devout Episcopalian and also advocated for broad inclusion of women in the ranks of leadership throughout the Episcopal Church. And she later became the first African American woman to be ordained an Episcopal priest at the age of 67 in 1967. So again, this is just a snapshot of some of the action steps that Pauli sought to execute to move her mission forward. And so I leave you all with a guide. Again, as Rosita said, oftentimes we're asked, what can we do? I've given you an idea of what Murray did. And I consider the slide that you're seeing on this screen Murray's activist framework. As I stated at the top of our conversation, Murray had a very clear two-part mission. What was her mission for the world? What did she want to see? Murray also used a lot of different action steps to execute that mission. And then finally, Murray supported those action steps by applying different strategies and different values. Murray understood that I can't do my advocacy work without being in community, without being compassionate, without being hopeful, even without being patient. And so this is a framework for you to think about. What is your mission? What action steps can you take to realize your mission? And what values or support strategies can support you in implementing these action steps? Again, what can we do? What we do? Here's a framework that you can use. Thank you. I am pleased to move us to our next speaker, our next presenter. It's my pleasure to introduce Reverend Dr. Terry Ofori. a leader in diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging, as well as a dedicated advocate for education, mentorship, and community engagement. As CEO and founder of Womanist Freedom School for Girls and Women's Leadership Development, she works to empower the next generation through leadership development, mentorship, and strategic initiatives that advance Murray's legacy. Reverend Afuri serves as Dean of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Belonging and chaplain at the Brooks School, where she fosters a culture of inclusion and belonging. An ordained minister in the Presbyterian Church, she has also held leadership roles at Harvard, Brown, Wellesley, shaping faith-based and academic communities. Her commitment to educational leadership and social justice continues to inspire, and we're honored to have her with us here today. Reverend Afuri, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Thorpe. I appreciate your kind introduction. Good evening, everyone. It is truly an honor to be here as part of the National Women's History Alliance Black History Month webinar, where we gather to uplift and reflect on the extraordinary contributions of the Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray. Pauli Murray was not just a scholar, lawyer, activist, and priest. Murray was a visionary leader who wove together faith, action, and education in a way that continues to shape how we understand justice today. As someone whose life and work has been deeply inspired by Murray's legacy, I'm excited to share how her life has influenced me in several ways, as a woman and as a priest and minister and reverend and a social justice advocate. And we'll talk about how her work has inspired me to partner with other women in intergenerational partnership. But first, I'll talk about Murray and how she understood the intersection of faith, action, and education. Murray understood that faith without action is incomplete. And as the scripture says, faith without works is dead. And so education without purpose is powerless. Murray's life was a testament to the transformative power of knowledge, spirituality, and justice-seeking work. And one of the things that I've noted, and particularly being in the DEI realm, a lot of the work that is done in DEI is geared towards changing people's thinking about other people. And so we have the notion of unconscious bias and different things that people somehow can explain that they know this information. We all know, that we should be kind, but why do we have reactions to people that are different from us? And one of the things that spirituality seeks to do is to move the notion of social justice from the head to the heart and connect the two. And so if we think about the civil rights movement, there was a lot of liminal activity in terms of singing, praying, and things of that nature. And I truly believe, working in this field of DEIB, that we need that connection to ground us. And I remember James Lawson, he actually spoke in one of my classes a number of years ago. This was before he passed away, and he was a mentor to Martin Luther King. And at the time he spoke in my class, I believe it was probably about 92. And he encouraged my students. He said, whatever action that you're taking or whatever you're doing, make sure that you have something grounding you, a spirituality, a faith, where you can bring the issues of the heart. And I truly believe that that is what motivated Pauli Murray to bring this work into the area of faith and marrying that with social justice. And so as a legal scholar, our groundbreaking argument, of course, we know shaped Brown versus Board of Education, laying the foundation for school desegregation. Writer and activist, she coined the term Jane Crow to describe the dual oppression of racism and sexism, bringing visibility to the struggles of Black women. As an educator, She was committed to raising critical consciousness, inspiring students to challenge injustice and reimagine possibilities. And as a priest, she helped to bring, I think, a holistic understanding of all of that work, emphasizing that faith must be lived out through action. Pauli Murray embodied the intersection of faith and justice. And her legacy, or their legacy, inspired the creation of the Women's Freedom School for Girls and Women's Leadership Development, which seeks to equip young women of color with the tools to lead, advocate, and challenge oppression. This summer, I plan to launch the Pauli Murray Freedom School, which is our inaugural chapter and the first pilot of this larger vision that is rooted in womanist theology, social justice education, and economic empowerment. I believe in providing a transformative education in leadership, advocacy, and faith-based activism, and also developing economic sustainability, which will teach our young women cooperative business models. One of the things that I think is the highlight of this work for me is the challenge and the motivation from intergenerational mentorship and collaboration. And so I have been privileged to work with who I call Mother Rosita, Pauli Murray's niece, and the CEO and founder of Preserving Pauli Murray, and really learning from the wisdom of the elders. I think in this age and what's happening right now, I think sometimes the younger people, I wouldn't consider myself young, but perhaps in that middle realm, sometimes we try to reinvent the wheel. Sometimes the younger people feel as if, they are on their own or they have to create something new. But I think that it's going to be very critical for us to really reach across generations and let this be an intergenerational action that we're doing. And the civil rights movement was actually very much like that. We had, the SCLC, and we had SNCC, which represented our younger students. So we had a number of we had CORE, and we need all of those voices at the table. And so having Mother Rosita partner with me and doing this Freedom School is really what I think is going to be transformative in the life of so many of our young people and ourselves. And the older generations need the energy of young leaders. I know even today, I learn from my students and I let them know that I am the teacher, but I'm also learning from them. And I think that they have a knowledge and a wisdom that we don't have, particularly as it relates to technology and the new things that are happening and just, the development of so many new platforms. And so I think together with this mentorship, we can mentor and they can help us. We create a cycle of empowerment. So it's not this linear thinking, but it's a circle of empowerment where women of different generations learn from, support, and uplift one another. So what I think about Pauli Murray is that they represent a holistic framework, that circle of life, and that it's kind of entry points for people along their cycle of life. And they taught us that education is a revolutionary act and that faith must be active in the fight for justice. And I think it's so important to say that because I think sometimes people have looked at faith as a sideline movement, but really we need to be front and center. Faith is what propels us. And so I just want to encourage all of us to think about what we can do. I know a number of us have been startled by the changes, no matter which way we voted. There's so many things happen rapidly, but we have to, number one, pause a bit and really see what's going on, and then learn from one another. And then we do need to act and use our knowledge, We have knowledge as educators, use our voice, our influence. If we're people of faith, use our faith to help stabilize um, the atmosphere, but also to help change it. So I know for me, I feel like I'm building more than just a school, but a movement. And just as Pauli Murray envisioned, we are ensuring that young women of color have the educational resources and community they need to thrive as leaders of justice and transformation. And in our age of self care, one of the things that womanist theology lifts up is community care. We have got to begin to learn what community care looks like in an age of crisis in our community. So I just want to thank you all for listening to me, and thank you for the opportunity to share about the legacy of Pauli Murray and how I was influenced by that. Thank you.
Hi, thank you, Reverend Terry. I'm Martha Wheelock. I'm the president of the board of the National Women's History Alliance. And in a closing, I just wanted to thank you, marvelous panelists, for your abundant knowledge and spirit and whatnot. And thank you all for joining us this today for the celebration of the Reverend Pauli Murray. She's a true intersectionalist. This is a new term, of course, for those of us who are in our upward years. But she really links all the circles that are usable. And I was thinking as you were talking that when we're open to acknowledging each one of us, our full humanity, we are all intersectionalists in a way. You know, how we can find some meeting point, some spiritual communal point in all of us. And then there'll be no division and it will be a Pollyanna world. But I also think that knowing what women can do and have done, what challenges and barriers they've overcome, they bring us to a fuller and richer humanity when we know these stories. And if you join the Women's History Alliance, you can celebrate with us. They can't take our women history away from us. Realize that. I wanted to give you one short example from the way I studied intersectionality, and that's a wonderful woman named Maggie Walker. And Maggie Walker was a true pioneer for Black and female entrepreneurship. She knew in her poor Black community in Virginia that they could buy their own homes, but only if they could get enough for a down payment. And then they had to be able to get a mortgage in a racially discriminating financial world. So she taught the young Black members how to save and to save weekly. And every week when they brought their little books into their saving bank with $1, they had to have $1. And somehow or other, she found people to match it for them. And this was in the 1905 or I think she founded in 1903, but in 1905, she started this program. And by 1920, her bank had issued over 600 mortgages to Black families, allowing them to buy homes and build wealth despite the widespread racial and economic barriers. I forgot to mention that she started the very first African American loan bank, and worked with insurance too. But so she spent her energy, first of all, in economics and in educating. She like Reverend Terry, she feels that education was going to be the gateway. And so she worked with the NAACP and other civil rights organizations. Again, another intersectionalist, working with all of the different ways that she came together in these things. And so now she remains an enduring symbol of Black economic empowerment and female entrepreneurship, and teaching people by generations to just save $1 a week. It's so fun. I also caught that that fever when I was a young girl. So next time you're in a bank, ask for a quarter. In fact, you can ask for the Pauli Murray quarter. There's a Pauli Murray quarter, or even a Susan B. Anthony silver dollar, and hold on to them and stroke them and feel that power of women's entrepreneurship and black empowerment. So now we have some prizes. I'm going to turn this over to Jill, and she's going to spin the wheel. And if we have a minute at the end about one question or so, and Jill will also announce how she's going to handle your questions. But thank you, panelists. Thank you all. And have fun celebrating Women's History Month. Ask your smart speaker to play a song by Roberta Flack, okay? And have a good time. Bravo.
Thank you, Martha. Maybe before I spin the wheel, I'm going to give away a few women's history kits. I can ask all the panelists one question, and maybe if you could take just a minute to answer it. And so I was thinking that Pauli Murray really was a trailblazer in multiple fields, right? Law, theology, activism, literature. What aspect of her legacy do you think is most overlooked? And how do we bring it to the forefront? And so maybe Angela, we could start with you. How would we bring that to the forefront? And or what does effective advocacy efforts today look like?
Absolutely. So, I think that one of the most overlooked pieces of Pauli Murray's legacy is something that connects to me deeply. We say Pauli was a theologian, an attorney, an activist, so many things, but Pauli was also a historian and a genealogist. Um, Pauli Murray grounded a lot of her work, a lot of her writing, a lot of her theory in history. If you have read Pauli's beautiful sweeping work, Proud Shoes, that comes from genealogical research. It is a genealogical and historical masterpiece. The archive that Rosita spoke to earlier, that Aunt Rosita spoke to earlier, that comes from Pauli Murray's archivist brain, historian brain. And so, again, this is something that's overlooked, but incredibly valuable to us. The power of history is that we can use it to connect people to tools that they can apply to their everyday lives now, just as I did in my talk. History is not static, it matters now. And our ancestors have left us breadcrumbs and guidelines to move through the future. And so I think recognizing Pauli as a historian also honors some of that legacy and lineage building work that I do on a daily basis to connect people to Pauli's history in order to help them move contemporary social justice work forward. And I'll offer as a closing comment, this is part of why it's so beautiful to be able to steward conversations like these alongside Pauli Murray's descendants. So folks like Aunt Rosita, and we also have someone in the audience who's joined us who's a relative, a cousin of Reverend Dr. Pauli Murray's. And so history walks among us in so many different, special, and tangible ways. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Reverend Terry, do you want to add to that? Oh, you're muted.
There we go. Thank you. I think it depends on the context of where we learned about Pauli Murray, when we first encountered her. So some people may know her as a lawyer, depending on if they're into law. People in the church might know her as a priest, social justice advocate, so many things. I didn't know that she was a historian. I was a history major, so I like that. But I think also the international influence that might be overlooked, the fact that she lived in Ghana, taught at University of Ghana, Accra, and I have lived in Ghana. And so I think just knowing the work that she was doing at the founding of the country was so influential, and her work with Kwame Nkrumah there. And so I think, the fact that she was international and that she, this country was just becoming an independent nation. And she was, very formative in the Constitution there. So I think that's something that people often forget. And I like the fact that she was, international and so wide in her worldview, so many things, touching so many areas, and encourages us, people say stay in your lane, and I agree with that. But she was in so many lanes, and the fact that we can be so holistic and so dynamic, and that we don't have to limit ourselves. And so that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, thank you. And Rosita, is there something that you think is overlooked and how can we bring it to the forefront?
Well, I'm not sure my thought at the moment is as important as their thoughts. But one of the things that I think a lot of people don't realize is that there was a softer side to Pauli Murray. Number one, she was a very gentle person in certain environments. For example, she loved animals, she loved dogs, and she almost had a dog with her all the time. She wouldn't live someplace where she couldn't have a dog, and she would take her dog with her everywhere. She also was a person who had a very unusual sense of humor, but a real sense of humor. And when she took the time to relax, um, and just be herself, not in public. She was quite humorous. She liked to tell stories. She was very funny. And this was a side that most people didn't see. But I felt very special that I had so many of those special kinds of conversations with her, where she, in a sense, really let her hair down. Um, on the more intellectual side, probably a lot of people have not read a book that was written about her, which was a compilation of her sermons and speeches. She's a very deep thinker. Um, and some of the, especially her religious sermons, were way above my pay grade. But I got a chance to meet Dr. Penn of Rice University, who, with I believe 5 other professors and theologians, dissected her writings in terms of her speeches and her sermons and put them into a book. And so I think a lot of people who are lay people and not involved in the ministry or being a priest may not have seen that, but that's an area where she was underrated. Also, because she became a priest so late in her life and did much of her work um, in different locations. So she didn't have a long-term relationship with any community or any specific Episcopal church. And so I think a lot of people are not aware of all that she brought to the Episcopal Church, as well as tying in with her religious background, her civil rights and human rights background.
Yeah. Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
thank you. And oh, was someone going to say something?
go
Mm,
ahead.
okay.
All
Well,
right.
wait, Martha, are you going to talk?
No, I was just going to say also that there's a very special area of Pauli Murray that goes unrecognized, and that is her gender identity struggle and how people uh, have gotten understanding in their own life from her struggle with it. And so I just wanted to mention that as another intersectional part of her. Gosh, there's a lot of the circles that you can put around that, Angela.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you. And on behalf of NWHA, thank you to all of you. You are all so very special, and we appreciate tonight so very much. These conversations are so important, so grateful. Now we're going to turn it over, and Martha, will you be able to record the names? We're going to
Yes.
the wheel of names, and we're going to select 3 winners to get a Women's History Month kit, which is right around the corner. And then I'm going to end it with just a closing video, everyone. And thank you all for being here tonight.